I don't write poetry, and and my third book of poems is coming out. I've written these to prove that I don't write poetry. And I think with the third one, I've pretty much done it. But I'm going to read two of those, and then I'm going to read some pages from a novel that I started last week. Much of it is handwritten right here. So, and also, I want to thank you all for having me here at this conference. It's been fascinating. The readings have been incredible, and I'm honored to read it all with any of these writers. So here we go. This first poem is called Straight. There was a boy with a twisted arm, a twisted arm. A twisted arm had this boy with a twisted arm, and the arm made a noise, a pop when he moved his twisted arm, the boy with that twisted arm. And you couldn't tell that it was twisted except that it looked twisted. His arm twisted like that, popping like that when he moved it, all twisted like that. That boy with that twisted arm, that boy with that twisted arm. But my arm is not twisted, though it has been twisted and even pops at times when I move it. And I move it a lot, my arm that is not twisted like the boy's, that boy with the twisted arm. A pop when he moved that twisted arm. And this is Weedy Weeds. The title of this book is Swimming, Swimmer, Swimming. And this is Weedy Weeds. We're not talking about the same place. The place I know is still there, still. Untouched, still with the wind, moving through the trees and the tree. Dogs sniffing at the banks of the stream. Sniff dogs sniff at the weedy banks. And we're not talking about the same place, someplace that I once knew, and you know, but I knew the stream with decent flow. The banks with decent tree coverage, shelter for the swimming swimmers. Swimming in the swimming pools where the dogs sniff along the weedy shoreline with roots and weeds, all weedy and rooted, and we're not talking about the same place, someplace. Lost among the reeds and the weeds, standing wet as moose hair and thick, slick as trout skin, and high as a swallow swoops through the dark and the dusty dusk. And bats flap through the batty night, wolves wolving their yowie yowls, while the weedy weeds, in the weedy weeds we hide. In the pooly pool, the wet weedy weeds, we swimming swimmers swim. QED. These pages are from a novel, and the title is either narration or Dimitri and Christina Have a Good Day. I haven't decided. Let me tell you about my dream, my father said. Two black men walk into a bar, and the rosy-faced white barkeep says, "We don't serve niggers in here." And one of the men points to the other one and says, "But he's the president." And the barkeep says, "Well, that's his problem." So the president walks over and gives the barkeep a box and says, These are Chillmark chocolates." And the barkeep says, "Thank you," and reaches over to shake the president's hand. The president jumps back, says, "What's that?" And the barkeep says, "It's a hand buzzer, a gag. Get used to it, asshole." "And that was your dream?" I asked him, as best I can remember. "And I've written something for you." And he looked at my face. "Not to you, but for you. It's the sort of something you would write if you wrote. Here it is. And yet I continue to live." That was how my father put it, sitting in his wheelchair, the one he could not move around by himself, his right arm useless in his lap, his left nearly so, held up slightly just under his sternum, his new black Velcro shut shoes uneven on the metal rest, the side of his face, the side near me, the left side, sagging visibly, his voice somewhere between his throat and the back of his tongue. And yet I continue to live. I had suggested that the salt my mother was sprinkling liberally over his food might not be the best thing for his high blood pressure, even though at his age, in his condition, who could really deny the man the simple pleasure of too much salt? But my mother snapped at me, saying, "I've been taking care of him for a long time." My first thought was how true that was in so many ways, good and bad. And that was when my father spoke, making a joke and a comment and reminding me that in the vessel that looked something like him, there was still the man I knew. And yet I continued to live, the right side of his mouth turning up in as much of a smile as his nerve-starved face would allow, and I laughed with him. My mother had not heard what he had said, and even if she had, it would have been lost to her, but she reacted to our laughter, and that reaction was what it would have been if she had heard his comment and had understood. It would have made no difference, none at all, as she became angry, insecure, and jealous that we were sharing anything. My father was depressed. It took no genius to see that. Sitting there all day long in that room in what they called assisted living, pressing his button, waiting for the orderly to come, hook him up to the lift to take him to the toilet, pressing his button because the nurses were late getting him ready for bed, and he was falling asleep in his chair, pressing his button because there was nothing to do but press the damn button. I was depressed too, seeing him that way, then leaving to live my own life far away, knowing his condition, knowing his sadness, knowing his boredom, and depressed because I could for days on end live my life without feeling the horror of his daily existence. What I didn't know was how he could continue to live, sitting there day after day, seeming so weak, feeling so little through his body, and feeling so much through his mind. His hand shaking, a crooked finger in the air when he was trying to tell me something. I could even see it when we were on the phone, how, like this at 79, could he still be alive? Then, during one of my useless visits that I made because I felt I ought to pay visits I made because I loved him, though I always seemed to make him sadder, he said, his crooked finger resting peacefully on the back of his right hand, "What do you think of this?" His voice was clearer than it had been in years, the words finding the full theater of his mouth, his eyes sharp on me. "I think it's awful," I told him, because he asked for very little and deserved the truth. "You should love your father more," I think he said, voice again retreating. I asked him if he thought I didn't visit enough, and he shook his head. A gesture I didn't know how to read, leaving me wondering if he meant that I did not visit enough or that I did. "Do you want me to visit more?" I asked, and he looked at me with his eyes, the eyes I had always known, and even though they were milky and red and weak, they became his eyes again, and he said, "Just one more time." I flew away from Philadelphia feeling that I understood all too well, not trying to understand anything, trying not to see anything. There was an animated in-flight movie that I watched without sound, and I was struck by just how realistic the whole thing was. The talking animals and stretched faces seemed to make perfect sense. I missed my daughter and was glad to be flying home, found some light in the thought that she would be peacefully sleeping when I walked into the house, and that I would peek into her room and see her face in the glow of her nightlight. And I resolved that I would never put her in the position I was in now, that I would never let my body fail me to the point that I could not control my own time and space and direction. It all sneaked up on my father and on me as well, thinking he and my brother and I, that he would turn a corner and be in some way new. But that corner turned out to be a steep hill, and gravity turned out to be as inevitable as we all know it is. And as quickly as the thought of my daughter had brought me back to some happiness, my love for her returned me to a rather selfish consideration